The UK government has debated a petition about outlawing all forms of geoengineering, which seems to have brought out a false binary argument of a choice between net zero or weather modification. Now, Charles isn't with us today, but he has sent us this report on that debate and the implications.
Thanks, Mike. Geoengineering brought back into the public square by this recent petition on the subject of geoengineering, make all forms of geoengineering affecting the environment illegal, signed by 160,000 people, rather more than in fact, and therefore to be debated in the House of Commons. Now, in order to ensure that all present would be on the same page, the House of Commons Library produced a briefing document about this in which they were keen to make the various points that whilst there had been funding for modelling research to understand the potential impacts of solar radiation management deployment, which is effectively treating the sky with chemicals in order to reflect the sun's rays, or at least so the theory goes, that it wasn't actually going to be happening. There is also a clause about what they call chemtrails. They say the term chemtrails refers to unsupported theories that the long-lasting trails of condensation, sometimes left in the sky by aeroplanes, brackets, contrails, close brackets, are produced by the deliberate spraying of certain chemicals into the atmosphere. So the debate itself took place on the 23rd of June, and this was led by Ros Savage, who was keen to concentrate not so much on what she described as being natural methods of geoengineering, such as planting woodlands and encouraging growth of peat bogs, etc. But she also lumped in with that carbon capture, which is certainly not in any way natural. But what she was keen to talk about was the unintended consequences of technology such as SRM. She said that humanity does not have a good track record on this. Our weather systems are immensely complex, interconnected, and not well understood. Altering sunlight could potentially disrupt monsoons or shift jet streams or trigger droughts in some regions whilst causing floods in others. Of course, she's quite right to point this out. And Angus MacDonald went on to make the point that mains gas at the moment is 6 pence per kilowatt hour, whilst renewable energy is selling at 24 pence per hour. So again, he was highlighting the point that, frankly, this situation at the moment is simply untenable on economic grounds. Nick Timothy significantly asked about ARIA, the Advanced Research and Innovation Agency, and the fundamental point of his question was to ask, why would you fund something when you say you're not going to do it? The response from the Permanent Undersecretary Climate, who's Kerry McCarthy, said that ARIA was conducting cautious, controlled research aimed at improving the understanding of SRM risks and impacts, but it is not deploying SRM technologies. I say again that its research will not release any toxic materials, nor will it alleviate the urgent need for increased decarbonisation efforts. There is no substitute for decarbonisation, which is why we are pressing on with our missions for clean power and net zero. Now, the fundamental question remains unanswered, which is why would you research something if you're absolutely not intending to practice it? But either way, the point that falls out of this debate is that we are continually presented with a false binary, and in casting SRM as the demon, it is very obvious, therefore, that pushing people towards the net zero agenda is the desired outcome from this. And of course, what it does is it removes the debate from that particular issue, in that there's no proper rigorous scientific examination of either the necessity for it or indeed the consequences of it. It's very hard to demonstrate in any meaningful sense that removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere would make any difference to climate that could actually be ascribed to that change. Now, this brings us on to the action of 0 Hour, effectively a site for campaigning and activism on this very subject. And notably, they have backed the Climate and Nature Bill, which of course was put forward by Ros Savage, and that was as a private member's bill. It's been through the House for its first reading and comes in for its second reading, having been deferred from January, next Friday, the 11th of July. Now, the reason for pointing you towards that is really to make the point that it's just simply not a grassroots activity or campaign. They have a banner across the bottom of their website shown here saying they've raised nearly £46,000, but only from 720 donations, suggesting that the people involved here have rather deeper pockets than the average man on the street. And I think that's a point very much worth making, because this is absolutely an elite agenda. And the other thing that has crept in recently and cannot be ignored anymore is the way in which human rights are now being weaponized in order to secure a future for people. That means that climate change is being addressed, and references to indigenous people. We see here on screen the news story that the government of the United Kingdom has submitted a statement on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change to the UN Human Rights Council. This, of course, is backed up by a page on the United Nations website talking about human rights being a strong lever for progress in climate change. So, in effect, this is beginning to manipulate, but also invert the very idea of human rights and the way in which they might express themselves. And this goes back some years. The BBC here talking about the European Court ruling on human rights being violated by climate inaction. And this is the extraordinary case reported on previously by UK Column that went up from the Swiss courts to the European Court of Human Rights, in which 4 ladies who were all, I think, over the age of 70, said that the Swiss authorities were not taking sufficient action to mitigate the effects of climate change. So they wanted human rights to be used in such a way that the government would have more rather than less interference in their lives. Now, precedent has been set, and this is now reflected back on this side of the channel by this paper in the House of Commons library, saying that there is a new precedent in human rights law, which is a somewhat alarming progression to note. But it's not all bad, and what I want to close with is an engagement at Leeds City Council on the 30th of June, in which we see here a still of Trudy and Suzanne addressing the council in a calm and reasonable way, and therefore getting the best out of those that were there. And there's not time to show the video in this clip now, but I will have the link to it in the show notes. And I really would encourage you to watch this council session, because they set their case out very, very well, and they get the responses that they deserve, in that there is a calm and reasoned counter conversation, and indeed one hopes that after the meeting this will actually lead to somewhere sensible. Now, this was one of the replies of one of the councillors present.
In terms of worldwide emissions, Great Britain is 1%. Leeds is 1% of Great Britain. And if we go on, as Ed Miliband wants us to go on, with solar farms, wind farms, with electricity costs to industry, the highest in the world, it will bankrupt the country. That's my view. We should, and if you remember, this government came to power saying that they were committed to growth. Well, you know, there's just no growth. So I believe we should continue with oil and gas and forget it. Thank you.
Now, I stopped the clip there because you would have heard a very brief smatter of applause at the end. And of course, he was the only person that was applauded, presumably because he has managed to trap himself in the real world. Now, the next clip is from another councillor, and it's very interesting to see how propaganda does actually affect itself, particularly where hypotheticals and modelling are affected. So just have a listen to this.
Because once the average global temperature goes above 1.5 degrees C, we get to what is known as a tipping point, which we can't return. So the positive feedback loops kick in. We already know that the ice caps are melting. We already know that the permafrost areas of the world are melting and releasing more CO2 into the atmosphere. And when that happens, you get into a positive feedback loop, from which it'll be very difficult to recover from. That's why it's known as a climate emergency.
Now, I have absolutely no doubt that she fully believes what she says, but her idea of a positive feedback loop is something that neither she nor anybody who dabbles in this area of what might be called climate science can ever substantiate. And this represents the fundamental issue with the geoengineering debate, which absolutely will be one, not just that we follow, but also that I would encourage you to get involved in, because you can see from that meeting there that there absolutely can be positive outcomes.